welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez, on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. We are on the defense's case, part 14. We are continuing right where we left off, which is in the middle of Dwight Van Horn's direct with Leslie Abramson doing the questioning for Erik's team. So let's get started. Please hit the like button and we will just pick up right where we left off. So we went on a break. That was their afternoon break or more. No, I'm sorry. I think it was their morning break. Yeah. So we are now back from break, and the court asks, everyone is present. Are we ready for the jury? Miss Abramson says, yes, Your Honor. Court says, let's get the jury out, please. The jury enters the courtroom, and the following proceedings were held. Court says, everyone is back. The jury is back. We'll resume with direct examination of the witness. Miss Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Deputy Van Horn, during the break, did you further take apart the number 4 Fiachi shot shell that you removed from 313? Yes, And what component did you remove from what components, rather, when you took it apart further? I removed the gunpowder and placed it inside a white letter-size envelope. I also removed the plastic overpowder wad. And now you have all the components, you have all the components now, with the exception of the gunpowder itself. These three, the additional components that you didn't previously put in the bag? Yes. And is this primer material still inside the base, this copper or this brass-looking base? Yes, there is. And is that what is struck first by the firing pin? Yes. Does that then ignite the gunpowder? Yes. And does that start the process of pushing stuff out of the tube? Yes, it does. Through the barrel of the gun? Yes. What I'd like to do is put these remaining pieces now into the plastic envelope, have it stapled, and put it inside the manila envelope. I've numbered for the court's records all of the components of that one shell at 326. With the air inside, it's hard to put it in there. Okay, now I want to show you what's previously been marked 305 and ask you to take out the materials that are inside that bag. The witness says, removing 3 plastic bags from the manila envelope. And do you recognize what those plastic bags comprise? This one? If I tell you hypothetically there's gunpowder wadded up, okay, one plastic bag has a number of copper-plated shot shells that appear to be consistent with number 4 buck size. And in the other plastic bag is a 12-gauge shotgun shell with the top cut open and revealing a combination wad or a wad column. And that wad column is what we've also been calling, at least what I've been calling in examining you, a shot cup. It's got a shot cup as part of its component, yes. Why don't you take that out so you can talk about the 3 different components of that? That looks like one piece. How does it have 3 components? When it says, technically, it is just one thing, but it takes the place of 3 separate components when they are made of separate components, I guess. The bottom portion, this disc right here, serves as the overpowder wad. The next portion that has this little oval shape that's right on top of the disc on the bottom is what would be referred to now as a spacer wad. And then this portion here, this top portion, is the shot cup. That's the part that would actually hold the shot pellets. So this takes the place of actually 3 components when shot cups were used as spacer wads and overpowder wads were used. I don't follow any of that, but okay. And to the best of your understanding right now, currently, Fiachi is still selling number 4 buckshot packed in exactly the way that the rounds were revealed to be packed from the ballistics evidence in this case, correct? That's correct. If you would take a look at the base of that cartridge from the one that you just took apart to see the brand name of it, the base that's inside the bag. Yes. Is that also Fiachi? Yes, it is. If you, Deputy Van Horn, wanted to do some test firings in order to get a general range of distance, in other words, to get a general idea of number 4 Fiachi spreads, um, upon firing, and if you wanted to do those test firings in relation to this case, given the ballistics evidence that was collected here, would you have used that ammunition, that copper-plated ammunition in this shot, in the shot cup? And Mr. Khan says, objection, irrelevant. The court says, overruled. The witness says, no. Why not? There's two things here that are going to make a distinct difference in the patterns that would be produced by the buckshot. Remember, this was a state's witness, by the way. I forgot to say that at the beginning of this video. I did mention it in the last video, but he was a state's witness in the first trial. He is now a defense witness, and he's quite a good defense witness, actually, if you're following this. He's the things that he is testifying to here are quite strong in the theory for the defense, and quite opposes the state. So it's just interesting that he's now here and the state did not call him. He continues on saying, number 1 is the copper plating of the lead. Copper is harder than lead. Lead is very soft. It's a very dense material, but it's very soft. So what happens is it gets dented very easily. So because it's dented, it gets out of round and it won't fly as true as something nice and round and spherical. That's one of the purposes for putting copper plating on shots, is to make it fly truer, and if it flies truer, it's going to create smaller patterns of dispersion than would buckshot that's not protected by the copper plating. That's also the exact same reason that you put a shot cup in buckshot, because as the pellets, the buck pellets, are making their way down the barrel, they're going down there at somewhere between 12 and 1400 feet per second, and they get out of there pretty quickly. But in that time, as they're going down the barrel, that shot is bouncing off the barrel, bouncing off one another, and the shot becomes deformed. So once again, by placing a barrier, which is this cup here, between the shot pellets and the barrel, it holds the buckshot in a little bit tighter of a group, even inside the barrel, than it would if it was just loose in the barrel. So, if you were to shoot buckshot that was just straight lead buckshot, and then you were to shoot it that was contained in a shot cup, and then you were to shoot it in with copper plated shot at the same distance from the same shotgun with ammunition from the same manufacturer, you'd probably see three very different patterns of the same ranges. So, can you think of any scientific purpose it would serve to do test fires with what is clearly the wrong ammunition in a case? No. So, is there any purpose, any reason at all why they should be using the wrong ammunition in their test firing? No. I want to pack this up. Let me just indicate what evidence item that was that you were just examining. That was 305. Let me put the pieces back together. Now, the shot cup that is contained within the Fiachi number 4 is standard size for each and every round, isn't it? No. I'm talking about if I buy a box of those. Oh, yes. Would you expect the shot cup to be identical to each one? Like each inside your box of cartridges or bullets. What do you call them? Shotgun shells. Inside each one of them, with the shot cup, all of the shot cups would be exactly identical inside that box. Inside, all the pieces inside should be identical. And would you expect it to have the same capacity, in other words, to hold the same number of pellets in each and every shell? Yes. If you bought a case of 200 of them, would that still be true? The shot cup would always be the same. It should be, yes. The shot cup can only hold so many pellets, correct? Yes. Can you think of any reason why that particular, well, strike that, is that a more advanced design, if you will, a more scientifically accurate designed round of ammunition than the other Fiachi 4 that you took apart? Well, I guess you would say this is an evolution. This is what people are looking for. Generally, you want the buckshot to have tighter patterns if you're taking large game. It increases your chance of getting all the pellets on target. So it's a better product in a sense? In a sense, yes. And what do you think the likelihood that in this better product would there would be a wad variation in the number of pellets actually packed in each shot shell? Slim. And now, Your Honor, what I'd like to do is put the live ammunition back with the clerk and have the gun brought over to the witness. The court says, let's verify there's no live ammo up there. The witness says, I have 2 live rounds of ammunition I've brought, but I'll be happy to give them to the deputy or you. The witness hands the ammunition to the judge. The court says, that's it then? The witness says, yes, sir. Ms. Abramson says, while we're waiting, Deputy Van Horn, in the first trial, when you testified, did you bring to court 4 Sheriff's Department from the lab Mossberg 500 series shotgun? Yes, I did. And did you use that to demonstrate to those juries, so this is in the first trial, to those juries, the basic operation of that type of shotgun? Yes. So he brought in a Mossberg, which wasn't completely identical, I think, to the brothers. So if I recall. And have you, before you took the stand this morning on an earlier day when you were here, taken a look at, I don't remember the number of the item of evidence, but the particular shotgun, that 127, did you take a look at evidence item 127? Yes, I did. The court says, why don't you give it to the witness? Ms. Abramson says, yes. And does that gun appear to operate in the same fashion as the gun that you brought to the court last time? Yes, ma'am. And does the sheriff's department, in fact, have more than one Mossberg 500 series shotguns in stock? In our library, yes, we do. You call it a library? Yes, or inventory. Okay. Could you demonstrate for the jury how you would go about, first of all, loading the magazine in that? Well, let me strike that. Let me ask you this. How many rounds does the magazine in that gun hold? 5. And what is the barrel length of that gun? 18.5 inches. And what is the legal barrel length for guns in California? For shotguns? Yes, it's 18 inches. So it has to be at least 18 inches. Is that correct? That's correct. Anything smaller is considered sawed off or illegal. It's considered a sawed off shotgun. Yes, it would be illegal. Sawed off shotguns, no one is allowed to possess those, correct? Well, no private person unless they have a permit, yes, but generally that's true. So then what would be the situation where you would be allowed to have one? Is what I'm wondering. Sheriff's Department can have them. As a government agency, yes, they can have them. Okay, that's a half an inch longer than the legal minimum, so that is a legal gun, correct? Yes. Are you familiar, as part of your necessary expertise, with the laws regulating the sale of various firearms? To a degree, yes. Are you familiar with the requirements that certain shotguns have to have dowels, wooden dowels, or plugs in them, so they cannot load more than 3 rounds for hunting purposes? Well, technically, there's no law that says that a shotgun must be furnished with the plug. The law that you're referring to is a fish and game law that does not allow you to have a shotgun in the field that will contain in excess of 3 rounds. In a shotgun like this, you could have either 3 rounds in the magazine or you could have 2 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. But most shotguns that are most shotguns that are sold for hunting purposes do in fact come with plugs that only allow you to place 2 rounds of ammunition in the magazine. And then one in the chamber? And then one in the chamber, yes. Is that particular gun, the Mossberg 50406, a gun that is designed or made for hunting purposes? No. And what's the main purpose, as you understand it, for a gun of that size and configuration? It's a defensive shotgun. And to the best of your knowledge, are guns like that sold with dowels in them? Not usually. Usually they come without. That's correct. The explanation is they're not going to be used for hunting anyway. That's correct. Okay, so we've heard a lot about how the dowels are supposed to be sold with the shotguns, but I guess it's not necessary in the Mossberg because they are used for protection and not for hunting. Okay, now, did you bring in a gun of dummy rounds with you? Yes, I did. Can you demonstrate for the jury what it takes to load the magazine? Okay. These are called dummy rounds, or actually they're really called action proving rounds, and they have no primer. There is no gunpowder, no primer. Otherwise, they're basically made just like any other shotgun shell so that you can check to see how a firearm functions without actually having to fire it. Did you make those? No, we bought these from, this is a Remington. We have a couple different manufacturers. We buy them from the manufacturers. So the manufacturers provide those for that very purpose. So that various people can check to see if a firearm is functioning properly without having any actual explosive inside. That's correct. So there's no primer. No. Is there gunpowder in them? No. In all other respects, they have the same weight and feel as a shotgun shell. Yes. Okay, so go ahead and demonstrate for the jury how you go about loading that. Okay, I've already checked the shotgun. There's no rounds in the magazine, and the chamber's empty as well. There's no ammunition in here of any type. To load the shotgun, well, would you just stop for a moment, Deputy Van Horn, and show the jury what it takes? Let's say I came across the gun and I wanted to know if there was any ammunition in the magazine, what would I have to do? Short of pulling the trigger, what is the hard way? What would I have to do to verify that there's no ammunition in the magazine? Okay, this is called a slide handle or a pump handle, and normally this in a partial loading condition right now. This is in a partial loading condition right now. So what we're going to do is put your thumb in the way forward that what you would do is look into the loading port, which is in the bottom of the shotgun here. There's a little plug. It's a magazine plug. And you'd look here, and what you're looking for is a round of shotgun ammunition. When you see this plug, then you know there's no rounds of ammunition inside the magazine tube, which is the tube right here. So at this point, you know what the magazine is empty. Okay. And she says, well, what does the plug look like? If I had never seen one before, would I know it's a plug? More importantly, what you'd know is it's not a shotgun shell. It's a black plastic, or it might be an aluminum plastic inside here. Sort of looks like a button. Yes, to further make sure the shotgun is open. If it's closed at this point, there's no way to tell if there's a live round of ammunition in the chamber, which is the back portion of the barrel, which is the top of the tube. So, what you'd have to do is operate the slide release, which is in the back of the trigger here. You just depress it, and that frees the slide so you can pull the slide down. And now you would look in the ejection port, and you're actually looking in the back of the barrel once again. Actually, if there's a live round of ammunition, pulling the slide back would eject the round of ammunition. So if there is a round here, it should pull it out. That's what gets people hurt. You still look inside to make absolutely sure there's no ammunition in there. Because they could get stuck and be there? They could. Okay. in its original condition, let's say if I bought this gun right now, is this its starting position, if you will, with the slide closed, with the sliding part towards the end of the magazine? Yes. Okay. And to load this through the loading gate here or loading port, you've got to make sure that slide handle is in the front position, the forward position, and you take a round of ammunition, you place it in here and just push it in your thumb. Push it in with your thumb. There's a device that's called a shell stop. There's a lot of components and moving parts. I don't think I want to touch a shotgun if there's all these things you got to look for. And that's what holds the rounds of ammunition in the magazine. You just continue loading. Does it take any force or effort to do that? Well, you have to overcome the spring pressure, and the more rounds you put in, when you put in the fourth or fifth round, it takes a little more pressure, but it's not a lot of pressure. So this is the fifth round. So this shotgun magazine tube is now loaded to its capacity of 5 rounds. It's longer than 5 rounds, though. What keeps you from putting more in? Well, the spring, which would be the whole length of the magazine tube here, this it has to have a place to compress. So as the spring compresses, that takes up space, and also they limit it to this length for whatever reason. Is the gun now ready to be fired? No. What do you have to do to make it ready? You have to place a round of ammunition into the chamber, and the way you do that, once again, you press the slide release or the pump release, or whatever you want to call it, back here at the back of the trigger forward. And when you do that, this frees the slide. Otherwise, if you don't depress it, you can't pull the slide. So you have to depress in the button here, put the slide down, and you can see a round of ammunition has dropped out of the magazine onto this chrome piece right here that's called an elevator. That's what Mossberg calls it. When you push the pump back forward, you can see the elevator comes up, and as it continues forward, it takes the rounds of ammunition and places it in the chamber, and now the firearm is ready to fire. Okay, so now if you pull the trigger, which I don't think anything will happen if you pull the trigger here. No. So if you pull the trigger, what happens? When you pull the trigger, it does two things. Obviously, it fires the rounds of ammunition, but it also internally activates the slide release. So when you pull the trigger, it's just going to make a clicking sound. You take the safety off first. She says, good idea. He says, okay, that would be you pull the trigger, it releases the hammer strikes the firing pin and fires the round. Well, when you do that, you no longer have to operate this little button here. It just does it automatically. So as you operate the slide to get to the spent cartridges out of the chamber, and that's how that happens. Comes out of this port right here, and once again, when it comes all the way to the back here, it drops another round of ammunition to the elevator, and you just continue with the process until you're done shooting. Hmm. All right, so that was kind of confusing. So I brought up, at least confusing without a visual of him demonstrating it. So I brought up this video here. This is a YouTube clip from Mossberg, the company, the manufacturer itself, talking about how to load a Mossberg 500 series. This probably isn't the exact same gun, although it is a similar or part of the same series, most likely. So this is if to load and unload a Mossberg 500 or 590 series.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Stafford from Mossberg. Today we're going to talk about administratively loading and unloading the Mossberg 500 and 590 series of shotguns. Now, before we can get to the loading and unloading, we need to verify the condition of the shotgun. First thing we need to do is ensure that the shotgun is on safe. With a 500 and 590 series of shotguns, that ambidextrous safety lever needs to be all the way to the rear. Once we verify that that lever is all the way to the rear, we can go ahead and open the action. To do that, we're going to depress the action release lever by pushing it all the way into the frame. Now I can bring that fore end all the way to the rear, opening the action. Once the action is open, I can physically and visually inspect the magazine tube and the firing chamber to make sure that it is free from any ammunition.
So that's what he was talking about when he was saying to look in the tube and the chamber to make sure that there was no ammo in there. He did that before he loaded it. So that's what he was talking about.
And I can also make sure that there's no debris or excess lubrication. Now, before I load the shotgun, what I'm going to do is I'm going to verify I'm utilizing the right ammunition. In most cases, that information is going to be on the left side of the barrel. All right, for the sake of the video, I'm utilizing dummy rounds, and I'm also going to show you how to load directly into the chamber. In this case, I'm going to take this dummy round, brass to the rear, and just let it fall into the ejection port. Once it does so, you'll see that the shell elevator maintains control of it, and as I bring the forend forward, it brings the shell to the appropriate level, and it allows those dual extractors to maintain control of that shell as it moves into the firing chamber. Now, at this point, I have a round chambered. Even though there's no ammunition inside the magazine tube, there's still a round in the chamber, so I'm going to make sure that that safety stays on and my finger stays off of the trigger. To place ammunition into the magazine tube, I'm going to invert the shotgun so that that loading port is facing upwards. I'm going to take these rounds, once again, brass to the rear, maintain control, and use my thumb to press it into the magazine tube. I'm going to press it far enough forward that I feel and hear that cartridge stop snap as it takes control of the rear of the shell. At no point am I going to try to put more rounds into that magazine tube than it can handle. That's how you damage the shotgun. Now, at this point, I have a shotgun that's completely loaded and ready to deploy. Now, what about downloading and unloading the shotgun? All right, the act of downloading the shotgun is simply taking that round out of the chamber and securing it elsewhere. Now, to do that, I'm going to once again depress that cartridge lever. I'm going to maintain control of the shotgun between my arm and my body, and I'm going to ease that forend to the rear. Once I bring it back, you can see those dual extractors maintaining control, and it's going to clear that chamber, and that elevator will come up and make sure that it doesn't fall through. I'm going to keep pulling back, and then once that elevator starts to drop out of the way, I can reach in and I can manually remove that shell from the shotgun. Once I've done that, I'm going to close the action. With the action closed, I'm going to now rotate that shotgun, and I'm going to reach inside of the loading port and access that cartridge stop, pressing it inward and allowing those shells to come out. Now, it's important to do this one at a time. You don't want to get overeager and try to control too many rounds at the same time, because it makes it difficult to control and you'll end up dropping rounds all over the place. Once I have all those rounds out of the magazine tube, I'm going to open the action, verify that the safety is still on, and give it one last check. I'm going to check both physically and visually the firing chamber and the magazine tube. Once I've checked and made sure that they're empty, I know that the shotgun is completely empty, it's safe, and it's ready to store. Thanks for watching. Have a
All right. That was excellent because someone who has never been around, shotguns, I've shot a handgun, but never a shotgun. So I thought that was helpful just to kind of give us a little bit of a context of what this particular witness, this firearms expert, was talking about. Because without the visual, it's hard to kind of picture it in your mind if you aren't familiar with the actual firearm. So, anyways, let's continue on. Miss Abramson asks, okay, so once you've loaded those 5 rounds and pressed the release and brought the slide back down so you can fire, okay, once that is completed, to fire each of those 5 rounds, what all do you have to do? Just keep moving the pump? Well, keep moving the pump all the way back and all the way forward, and you have to pull the trigger. So you just slide the pump and pull the trigger? Right. How quickly can that be done? To fire 5 rounds with this type of pump action shotgun, how fast can that be done? Do you know? Well, it would depend on a lot of things. It would depend on the dexterity of who was operating the gun. If the gun was being fired from the shoulder and you took the gun away from your shoulder to pump the gun and had to bring it up, you would obviously take more time. You could fire 5 shots in a pretty short amount of time. 5 seconds? I would say so. So, if you had, hypothetically, two people each firing 5 shots more or less simultaneously, you could fire 10 rounds in 5 seconds, correct? That's a possibility. Because remember, the state's trying to say, like, they dragged this out and it was, meant to be, it wasn't out of fear. And, they didn't, it doesn't support their case if all the shots were fired within a few seconds and done so quickly and abruptly, making it as if it was like a overreaction to being afraid. Whereas if the state would have you believe that this was slow and agonizing and brutal and all that, when we know that it happened very quickly. So even if you went a little slower, you could fire 10 rounds certainly in 10 seconds. Yes. Now, with respect to the basic manner in which shotgun ammunition operates, is there a chart that you helped assemble from from the first trial that was used in that trial? Yes. Thank you. I have what was previously marked 44. We've now marked it to 324. Is this the chart? I don't know. High is usually not good here. Is that visual? Okay. Is this the chart that you helped prepare in 1993? Yes. And what does this chart purport to illustrate, Deputy Van Horn? To the left side of the chart and also in the middle would basically show you want me to get down there? Yeah, I think it could explain it. So miraculously, I somehow found Exhibit 44 from the Menendez the first trial, which is now the exhibit that they're talking about. It's very difficult to see. This looks like the barrel of a shotgun and then a poof and some smoke coming out, bigger pile of smoke, bigger plume of smoke going out. So that's what that looks like to me. So, but then there's also this paper or this piece of it's also part of the exhibit, and I'm can't identify what it means. This is probably what's inside the shotgun, like this is the pistol or the piston, the gunpowder, the whatever. He'll probably explain it, but I wanted to give you guys a visual. I'm going to try to look for some of these exhibits if I can. When it comes to like, obviously I couldn't do anything with the wounds, but maybe when I can find some of these exhibits, I will try to show them on the screen. So that is what they're referring to. So he says to the left side of the chart and also in the middle would basically show you want me to get down there? She says, yeah, I think you could explain it. He says these three diagrams here, so there's three, maybe four, A, B, C, and D would basically show the stages of shot dispersions. Oh, he's talking about this A, B, C, and D, I guess. A, B, yeah, there's letters on there, A, B, C, and D. All right, so those are what he's talking about. These three diagrams here, A, B, C, and D, would basically show the stages of shot dispersion as it leaves the barrel. In figure A here, well, what's the dark compared to the white? Okay, what we're really looking at here is the inner circle. The inner portion on both of these would represent what you'd see in actuality. So kind of discard the outside circle here and concentrate on the inside. And this would represent up to and including a contact wound, a shotgun out to some distance. Now, I can't tell you what that distance is without specific shotgun and a specific round of ammunition, so the pellets will leave no matter what size they are. They're going to leave the barrel. And for some distance, they're going to stay together and they're going to pump just one single hole through an object without leaving any indication of individual pellet impacts. Now, when you get a little bit further away, someplace after the pattern starts to open up just a little bit, and we're looking at the inside here, and you can see we call it a rat holing because nobody else told us what to call it. Well, how about scappling? Scappling. And what happens here, and this would basically represent a birdshot pattern, but the same would hold true with buck. The reason that indicates birdshot is there's so many little pellets represented there. Is that right? Yes. So if you looked at this pattern from the top, what you would see is like just one single lead column going out. For the sake of argument, the internal dimension of the 12 gauge shotgun is 279 thousandths, or just shy of 3/4 of an inch, or an itch, as the court clerk wrote. Sorry, it's funny to me. These are forever i- in court records as 3/4 of an inch. Generally, this would be 3/4 of an inch. So now, once you get past the distance where the pattern is going to be produced, gets a little bit further from the barrel, and if you were to take a picture down from the top, you'd see that maybe now it's 775 thousandths, or now it's more than 3/4 of an inch. The pellets are starting to spread away from the group, but they're not individually leaving the group yet. As the pattern continued on downrange, you start to get some pellets that are leaving the main group, and they call these independent or satellite pellet strikes. But the bulk of the pattern is still together. And then as the pattern continues downrange, you get individual pellet strikes where all of the pellets are going to take their own path and make their individual holes in the target. Do you want this explained too? Yes, I do. On the right side, there appears to be photographs of a gun barrel and then various things coming out of it. So, just so the court knows, the photographs are sub-labeled A, B, C, and D. And the shot patterns that you previously described were also labeled from A through D. Yes. Okay, why don't you explain first of all what photograph A shows? Okay, on the top photograph, on the left side of the photograph, you can see the muzzle, which is the forward end of the barrel with the front side attached to it. And you see what appears to be a cloud that's coming out of there. And what that is basically the cloud of gases and debris that's already inside the barrel that are being pushed out of the barrel by the approaching of the shot column and the gases. So that's what we see here. There's no pellets or products or combustion from this having left the barrel yet. So the whatever air and gases and whatever might have been inside that barrel before the shotgun shell even leaves the barrel, all of that gets pushed out with the pressure from the pin firing. So the second photograph, photograph B, once again, you can see the barrel with the front slight, and here's the shot pattern. It's probably about maybe an inch or so, 2 inches in front of the barrel, and right behind that is a big column of smoke. It's just starting to expand. Those gases are very, very hot. They want to expand like all gases do. They want to expand and get out of there to where the air is cooler and stuff. So that's what's happening right here. I'm going to flip back over to the images so you can kind of understand what he's talking about again. So he just said this is the first puff of air that is the gases that are built up in uh, the barrel itself. Now we're starting to get the uh, more of the a larger plume of smoke here. All right, so then now once again, part of the barrel is obscured even more than here. Even part of the front side is obscured. The pellets are just a little bit further down range, and if you look and compare to the front of the pattern in photograph B to photograph C, you can see that we're just starting to get some separation here in the column of shot. And the gas cloud continues to expand until it reaches the ambient temperatures that's outside. So, like you said, it's very hot. This these plumes of smoke and gases, it's very hot. That's why when there's like a contact wound, you have um, what do they call it? There's like blackness that's on top of or on the skin, and it probably burns the skin. He says it's very hot. So, I can't think of it now. Stippling? Stippling, I think is the word. In the bottom photo, we can clearly see the muzzle of the front side. The gas cloud is now quite a bit larger, and in the photograph, we can clearly see, as a matter of fact, if you look at this, there's one pellet that's just out in front of the rest of the pellets. You can see the wadding. I'm sure it's easier to see than on the actual document itself, but it does look like you can see a pellet or something out here, perhaps, on the screen. So he might be right that there's a loose stray pellet now. So you can see the sorry, so it's just a rest there was one pellet that's out in front of the rest of the pellets. You can see the wadding that's behind the pellets, and this is what occurs as you get further and further away from the barrel. Now, you've indicated that you could not give a specific distance at which you could predict which of these type of patterns you would find unless you're using the identical gun and the identical ammunition. Is that correct? That's correct. And how? Strike that. If you're investigating a case, Deputy Van Horn, and there are shot patterns, pellet patterns observable either on physical objects or on the bodies of decedents, and it's important for the case that you have some idea of the distance away from the object that bears that pattern. The muzzle of the gun was what would you do in order to come up with some idea of what possible distances the muzzle of the gun would have been from the ultimate target? Without the gun and the ammunition, let's assume you do have the gun and you can figure out, as you've done here from the remnants of ammunition, what ammunition was used. Then I would take that gun and, like ammunition, similar ammunition, and go out and conduct distance determinations and give the investigators a bracketed range that I felt that was shot, that was shot, was fired in, that shot was fired in. Okay. And when you say a bracketed range, what do you mean by that? Well, let's see. For instance, that the pattern there, D, just for the sake of argument, will say 4 inches across, and that's the pattern that we have to deal with. Then I would take the shotgun that was involved in the same type of ammunition. Then I would go out and shoot from a distance to where I got a pattern that was 4 inches, knowing full well that if you take a box of ammunition that's the same and take a shotgun, that you're going to get a pretty good variation even within the same box of shotgun shells. What you would have to do, or what I would do, is I would go to a distance, maybe 2 feet in front of that, and I would shoot distance patterns until I got a pattern that was consistently smaller than the pattern in question. And let's say, once again, for the sake of argument, that that was 6 feet, then I would take the same type of ammunition and I would move back to 2 feet from where I got this pattern originally, and I would shoot patterns until I got patterns that were consistently larger than the pattern in question. This is not what Dr. McCarthy did at all. And let's say that was 9 feet, and therefore that would be my bracket between 6 feet and 9 feet away. That makes perfect sense. You try to replicate the pattern and you give a variation or a range based on making, when your pattern starts to get bigger and smaller. So then you have a range, between 6 and 9 feet, he says. And that's even though you may have at 7.5 feet, let's say, gotten the identical pattern, you would still bracket it? Yes, absolutely. Because you can't be absolutely certain that every round of ammunition fired at every time, even through the same gun, would produce the identical pattern at the identical distance. He says that's a given. Now, let's assume you do not have the same gun, but you have a similar gun. Same manufacturer, same exact model number, and you have the identical ammunition, and you want to just get a general range. Would you do test firings and come up with bracketed ranges? No. Why not? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's a commandment of doing distance determinations. If you don't have the firearm, you don't do distance determinations. They don't have the firearm. They have a different firearm. So it's the same gun, or it's not the same gun, but a similar gun. So it's the same. They did not use the same guns in this case because they were never recovered. They were, as Erik testified to, they were. He put them over the was it Mulholland, one of the roads that they were on. He like threw it down the hill. I can't remember what street he was on. No, it escapes me. That was so long ago. But he threw the Mossberg shotguns and any ammunition that they had, minus what they had to go back for and take out of Lyle's car when the car was on the property and seized by the police at that time. When they went in, and I don't know if you remember that, but the next day Lyle's car was on the property. The property was in the custody of the police at the time, and Lyle knew that he had to get into the car because that's where some of the shotgun shells were. They didn't get rid of all the shells. So he had to get back into the car and had to ask for permission from police, and he got it. And it gave them a lot more time before they were ever considered suspects. Let's just say that. So I just big old, you know, protocol policy procedure that was not followed and that cost them probably millions and or hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigations, more investigation because they didn't have a lead yet. But anyways, I digress. So they did not have the same gun. Guns were disposed of. So without the actual guns that were fired in this case, he says, no, you wouldn't do this because you don't have the same firearm, so you can't do distance determinations. It's just not going to be the same. So she says, I'm sorry. He says, for instance, yes. If we saw this pattern once again in D and the investigator wanted to know how far away the shot was fired, basically the only thing I would tell him is that it's not a contact wound. Well, there is general truism, though, is there not, that the patterns get larger the farther away you go? That's a given, yes, ma'am. And they get larger in more or less a generally consistent way. Generally. For example, if you're at the point where you have a partial pattern, let's say you're dealing with number 4 buckshot as a hypothetical, and therefore you know there are 27 pellets to be accounted for, okay? Yes. Let us say you find a pattern that exists that consists of what appears to be about half of what you see on diagram D here on 324, okay? Let's say you find 13 or 14 pellets distributed in this type of pattern, okay? Would you expect the other 13 pellets to look like A, to be tightly crumpled together still? No. So she's saying some pellets were spread farther apart and some were tighter together. So, and the state is saying it's the same shot, but she's saying that can't be done. Well, she's asking him, and he's saying it can't be the same shot. Would you expect the other 13 pellets to be still in a tight enough clump that there's only a little clumping around the edge? No. Would you generally expect the rest of the 13 to also be traveling in a state of separation similar to the ones that you have on your target? Yes. If a round is fired from a shotgun, a buckshot round, say consisting of 27 pellets, and they are at a particular distance spread, such as shown in diagram G, if there are is there any law of nature that you are aware of that would have part of that shot pattern come back together and form a tighter pattern for the second target? I have not seen that. That's what Dr. McCarthy, I believe, testified to. That the pattern spread out and came back together, which is not possible. Is that anything that you could conceive of happening? No. Now, I wanted to get back for just a moment to the gun. Based on your experience as a firearms examiner, how many firearm cases did you say you've actually worked on, done examinations and investigations on? You mean cases or guns that I've fired in the. This has to do with your experience in dealing with cases with guns that have been used in allegedly criminal activity, guns that have been fired in the course of alleged criminal activity. Several thousand. Remember, this is LA County. And with respect to the way that guns are loaded, he's with the LA County what we call it. So yes, he's with LA County. He's the LA County firearms guy. And with respect to the way guns are loaded, particularly shotguns, when they are used in activities between people where a person is shot by a gun that has been loaded by another person, for example, are there patterns that emerge as to how shotguns, such as the one that you have there, are usually loaded? Do you understand the question, or am I being obtuse? He says, yes, you mean just with shotguns, or well, let me ask you this. Did you form the opinion with respect to this case that the notion that 12 rounds were fired is unlikely and that a more likely number would have been 11? Based upon the way that I've seen guns in criminal activity loaded, it's unusual to find a gun that has a magazine that's separate from the firearm like this. Basically, what I'm talking about is anything but a revolver, where a revolver has a cylinder you preload with 6 shots, and as soon as you close the cylinder, the firearm is ready to fire. Usually, firearms that have magazines with them are loaded to the capacity to the magazine, and when they're put into, for lack of a better term, put into action, the person will cause a round of ammunition to make its way from the magazine into the chamber, and that's the extent of it. It's unusual outside of police officer shootings to find a firearm with a magazine that is loaded to the capacity of the firearm, which means the magazine capacity plus 1 round. Well, in order to go beyond the magazine, a gun has to be manipulated in such a way that a shell is then loaded directly into the chamber, correct? Yes. When you say outside of police officer shootings, you mean outside of situations where police officers have themselves fired the weapon? Yes. Because police officers are trained to fully load, including into the chamber. Yes. Of non revolvers. Yes. And in recent years, in fact, have most of the police agencies, if not all of them in Los Angeles County, switched from revolvers as their basic service weapon to semi automatic handguns that do have both a magazine and a capacity to add another round to the chamber. Yes. And in those cases where police officers are using those kinds of guns, uh, they do load even into the chamber? Yes. But amateurs, in your experience, do not? It's unusual, yes. So that if hypothetically you were informed that in this case 2 shotguns were used and each were loaded to the capacity of only 5 rounds each, and then one gun had an additional round loaded after the first 5 were gone, would that be typical of how shotguns are used? Objection assumes facts, not an evidence. Sustained. Ms. Abramson says, it's a hypothetical, Your Honor. The court says he's already given his answer as far as these things are done. All right. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, just to get the outside parameters, Detective Van Horn, would you expect a different pattern of any shotgun loaded with number 4 buckshot if that gun were fired at 1 foot versus 30 feet? Yes. Would you expect a different pattern, an ever spreading pattern, from any, say, Mossberg shotgun if the gun were fired from, say, 3 feet as compared to 14 feet? Yes. So, when you say you really can't tell a specific range, there are some general notions that at certain distances you'll get a greater spread or a lesser spread. Objection leading. Overruled. Correct? Yes. The further away the shot pattern gets from the end of the barrel, the bigger the spread of the pattern is going to be. Now, have you examined the crime scene and coroner photographs in this case? To a degree. Did you look at them back in 1993 or more recently? I looked at them in 93 and recently, yes. And do you recall, and if you don't, I can show it to you. Well, let me show it to you. Let me just pull out one of the boards that has a number of things mounted. This is Exhibit 301, and I'm just going to stand here for a minute because this is a sort of low-tech evidence presentation system here. If you look at photograph F, do you recognize that as being a photograph of the decedent Jose Menendez's left elbow? Yes. And in your opinion, is there a quote, spread pattern or pellet marks on that elbow? Objection assumes facts not in evidence and no medical basis for his witness testimony. Overruled. The witness says yes, there's individual pellet strikes on the elbow. So that could very well correlate to those exit wounds, the entry and exit wounds that would account for those missing pellets in the arm, if you recall from previous testimony. Ms. Abramson says, and you are qualified to, and you can recognize what appears to be shotgun pellet wounds on the exterior of the human body. Objection, no foundation. The court says, well, you can establish his qualification in that field. Have you been trained by the Sheriff's Department to recognize shotgun pellet impact on a variety of surfaces? Yes. Including the human body? Yes. And are you called upon routinely to examine shotgun pattern impressions on human bodies? Well, not routinely. It's not something we do a lot, but yes, I've done it in the past. Yes. And have you done it and when you have done it in the past, have you testified in cases concerning generally the issue of whether there is an individual pellet pattern on a portion of the human body as compared to a single shot column pattern, as you have shown us on the diagram? Yes. And do you frequently consult with other scientific personnel at the sheriff's crime lab in these investigations and examinations of ballistics evidence? Sometimes, yes. Now, you do not, well, do you consider yourself an expert on what happens to ballistic evidence once it passes into the human body? Absolutely not. So, he would never claim to be an expert in something he's not an expert in, like Dr. McCarthy. Do you think an engineer is more trained to know what a shot pattern spread is than you are? Objection, argumentative, calls for speculation. Sustained. And can you tell us, Deputy Van Horn, on how many occasions have you observed photographs, whether coroner's photographs or crime scene photographs of human bodies that show evidence of shotgun pellet impacts? Probably in excess of 100 times. And so I would call your attention then to photographs A and B and ask whether, in your opinion, that's these two, pointing, she says, these photographs also show evidence of shotgun pellet impacts. Objection calls for speculation, no foundation. Overruled, you can answer the question. Thank you, Your Honor. That's what they appear to be, shotgun patterns. Yes. Do those appear to be a spread pattern? Yes. Now, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the pattern that's demonstrated in photograph F on Mr. Menendez's left elbow is similar or dissimilar to the patterns that are shown in A and B on Mrs. Menendez's left breast? Objection vague and calls for speculation. The court says it is vague. Ms. Abramson says, okay, is the spread similar? In other words, the distance between the pellets? Well, there's a spread. I don't see a scale in this photograph to give you an idea of what the spread is. They appear that they could be somewhat similar in spread. Okay. Would you, as an expert firearms examiner and ballistics expert, be prepared, however, to venture an opinion as to whether or not the round of shotgun ammunition that caused the spread on Mr. Menendez's left elbow also caused the pellet defects on Mrs. Menendez's left breast? Objection. Calls for speculation, no foundation. Sustained. How? He can have opinions, right? He can say whether he can have an opinion. Yeah, Ms. Abramson says, I don't understand that, Your Honor. He says, go on to something else and we'll discuss it. When? When the witness is no longer on the stand? This is crazy. Why can't she ask him that? Holy cow. I feel like I'm losing my mind with this judge sometimes. Do you feel you have enough information based on, first of all, did you read the coroner's autopsy reports on this case? Yes, I did. And based on the autopsy reports and the photographs, do you feel you have enough information to make an association between the defects that are shown on Mr. Menendez's left elbow and the defects that are shown on Mrs. Menendez's left breast? No. Is that because of your lack of expertise or for some other reason? Well, I don't know the position of the body when either both shots or one shot was fired. The fact that both appear to be incomplete patterns means that the patterns would be far greater than what's depicted in either of the photographs. So I don't feel there's enough information there to render an opinion. And given that information, you wouldn't just assume it was shared just because neither one is a complete pattern, would you? It would be a possibility, but no, I wouldn't say conclusively that they're the same. So it could be, and it also could not be. Yes. Have you ever participated, Deputy Van Horn, in an effort to what is called reconstruct the sequence of a multiple shooting incident? I've been asked to participate in reconstructions, yes. And what was it that was being reconstructed in those scenes? What was it that what well strike that. What was being reconstructed? What was the goal? To try and determine things that were not known based upon information that was available and assembling people to see if various areas of expertise could come to an opinion as to what happened. When you say assembling people with various expertise, let me ask you hypothetically if you were requested to attempt a reconstruction of multiple shotgun shootings with multiple, let's say two victims, and let's say two guns and two people firing those guns and multiple wounds in the area of, let's say, in excess of 10, what kind of people would you assemble before you would endeavor to try to reconstruct such a shooting? Objection, irrelevant, calls for speculation, cumulative. Overruled. You can answer the question, says the court. The witness says, thank you, Your Honor. I'd want to consult with the coroner who did the autopsies. Oh, well, what a novel idea. Talk to the coroner, right? Like Dr. McCarthy did not do. Ms. Abramson says, so you mean in person actually talk to him? Yes. Before you formed any opinions? Yes, because generally I can't understand autopsy reports other than it went left to right and up and down or back to front, but I don't understand the medical terms. The next person I'd want to consult with, if there was blood evidence at the scene, I'd want to consult with a serologist who could construct the blood spatter patterns that were there and also would be able to delineate if there's two victims, which blood belongs to which. The other person I would want to talk to is the handling detective, so Detective Zoller, who was obviously at the scene so that he could provide any evidence from either eye or ear witnesses that could shed some light on what might have happened. So the coroner, a serologist, and the lead detective. And if there was an issue involving or potential issue involving clothing and the direction of entry or exit of ballistics material through clothing, would you want to consult with a clothing expert, a fiber expert? That's possible, yes. And does the sheriff department, in fact, have experts in all those fields in serology, inherent fiber evidence, and obviously in ballistics evidence? They have them all right there in the crime lab, correct? Yes. So what stopped them from doing it in this case is what I'd like to know. Is this a case, given all the known evidence from photographs from that which was gathered from the coroner's reports, is this a case in which you, Deputy Van Horn, would ever have attempted a reconstruction? Well, I don't know what level you mean there. I mean, certainly you might attempt it, but there's a lot of things here that fly in the face of doing a reconstruction, in my opinion. Okay. Can you give us an idea of what those things are? Well, from the physical evidence that was submitted to me, I know that that at least 8 shots were fired, but based upon I've been either a policeman or a deputy sheriff for more than 22 years, so I've seen a lot of shotgun wounds. It's a little hard for me to believe that all the wounds that occurred to Mr. and Mrs. Menendez occurred with only 6 rounds of buckshot. So I would assume that there was evidence that was either overlooked or not collected that would lend itself to more than the 8 shots that I can specifically attribute to shots that were fired there. So that would be the one that would bother me for the reconstruction. Why couldn't you just make up a number and look through the evidence to look to see if you could make things fit? I wouldn't have a job very long if I did that. Go on. What else is it about the scene or this situation that militates against doing a real reconstruction? The fact that reading testimony from the first trial and also some of the things from the trial that at least at some point there's testimony that both victims were mobile as well as both shooters being mobile. And I think that when you take that into consideration, the possibility being able to reconstruct, obviously things only occur one way. I'm going to stop right there and say that statement right there is very, very telling that he maybe believes the brothers because he said there was testimony. I mean, he's read the testimony, obviously, from the first trial. Now that he's testifying in the second trial, he's saying there's testimony from both victims, or that both victims were mobile. Well, the only people that would know that, besides, the forensic experts and things, would be Erik and Lyle Menendez, who testified in the first trial. And he says, as well as both the shooters being mobile. So that means that he gives credence to the brothers' testimony. It's to some degree because he's saying things can't, things can only happen one way, and there's many ways. He's saying in this sentence or paragraph that he's saying things can only happen one way, and there's a myriad of ways in which it could have happened with both victims being mobile, both of the shooters being mobile, and all the different angles and things that could have occurred there. So he can't make any kind of determination. But of course, Mr. Khan says, I would make a motion to strike as calling for hearsay. The court says the entire answer. Mr. Khan says, yes, concerning testimony from the first trial. How is that hearsay? The court says, but we've talked about trial testimony before. Whatever. The court sustains that because he's Judge Weisberg. The court says objection sustained, the answer is stricken. Ms. Abramson says, well, whose testimony are you referring to? Objection calls for hearsay. Well, the question has no basis since the answer was stricken, so you'd have to. Oh, okay. If you accept hypothetically, well, first of all, you've reviewed some testimony from the first trial? Yes. And have you also talked to Ron Linhart, a criminalist at the sheriff's crime lab? He's going to be, I believe he's our next witness. Hold on. Yes, Ron Linhart is our next witness after Deputy Dwight Van Horn. Have you also talked to Ron Linhart, a criminalist at the sheriff's crime lab? Yes. And are you aware that Mr. Linhart issued a report concerning certain aspects of the crime scene evidence? Yes. And was one of the conclusions of his objection calls for hearsay? I'm offering this as a hypothetical. I would ask you to accept hypothetically that based on Linhart's evaluation of the crime scene evidence, Mr. Menendez had to be mobile at some point in order to receive the left thigh wound because he didn't receive it seated in his final position. Objection vague and assumes facts, not in evidence. The court says, well, this is asked as a hypothetical question. Assume that that was the information you had obtained from Mr. Linhart. Ms. Abramson says, okay, assume that, and assume also that there was testimony from Erik Menendez that when he entered the den just prior to the shooting, his father was standing and appeared to be moving, and that shortly thereafter his mother was standing and appeared to be moving. Does that indicate to you, strike that, and further assume hypothetically that there's testimony from Erik Menendez that both he and his brother were moving and both firing simultaneously? Okay, with that as a foundational set of hypothetical facts, based on those hypothetical facts, would that indicate to you hypothetically that both decedents were mobile and both shooters were mobile during this shooting? Mr. Khan says, objection, assumes facts, not in evidence, and calls for speculation. And the court says, well, really, all it says is that other than what Mr. Linhart, even what Mr. Linhart said, just assuming these things actually occurred as these people describe them, if he accepts what they say, then we don't need this witness to say that. Well, let's assume hypothetically all four people are moving during the shooting, okay? Is there something that would influence your judgment or whether or not the sequence of shots and the exact position of the decedents and shooters for those shots could be determined? Yes. And what in your opinion, how in that opinion would that influence that decision? It would complicate it. Complicated? Do you believe, based on the information that is available, the actual factual evidence here, that this is a shooting incident that could be reconstructed reliably with respect to the sequence of shots and the positions of both the shooters and the decedents? Objection asked and answered. The court says, when you say the factual information, you're talking about the information, physical evidence in this at the crime scene? Ms. Abramson says, physical evidence at the crime scene, the testimony evidence as observed by the coroner, the opinion of, hypothetically, Mr. Linhart, the ballistics evidence, the things that you've seen in the photos. The witness says, I'm sorry, I'm going to have you repeat the question. The court says, with all that information in mind, she's asking you whether or not you could have done a reconstruction. The witness says, I don't believe so. Ms. Abramson says, in fact, prior to the first trial, did the deputy district attorney then assigned to this case come to you and ask you if, in your opinion, a reconstruction could be done of this case? Objection irrelevant, calls for hearsay, sustained. Oh boy. I think this did happen, and the state doesn't want the jury to know this. All right, and the court is going along with that, with the state, of course. Ms. Abramson says, now you're aware of the testimony of Roger McCarthy, are you not? Yes. You're aware of the report that failure analysis he and Mr. Grewal produced? Yes. And in your opinion, did Dr. McCarthy create what you would call a scientifically reliable reconstruction? Objection, beyond the expertise of this witness, calls for the speculation and improper opinion. The court says overruled. The witness says no. It was not scientific. It was not scientifically reliable. I want to go back for a moment to something you mentioned earlier in your testimony when you were a firearms instructor. Was it part of your job not just to train experienced officers, but to train newcomers? Yes. And was there, or is there, an issue concerning crossfire that would come up routinely with people who were not familiar with the operation of guns, who were using guns on the range? Yes. And would you describe what that means and how it would come up? A crossfire situation would involve two people who are trying to engage the same target, but they put themselves in the field of fire of the other person. In other words, if this gentleman right here in the black shirt was my partner and there was somebody with a gun in front of us and we needed to use deadly force to stop him from doing what he was doing, this would be a good position for us to do that because if I miss, I could strike him. But if he misses, he could strike me. Oh, wait, this would not be a good position because if I miss, I could strike him. If he misses, he could strike me. So we try and instill in them, even in the academy. So basically, like they crossed their paths of shotgun fire because Lyle went behind the couch and Erik was in front of the couch, in front of the coffee table, shooting at his mother. So, and Lyle went into the back of the couch, shooting the back of his father's head. So they were could have potentially harmed one another there too. Could have been even more disastrous. Is this something that the new trainees and recruits seem to know instinctively, or is this something that really needs to be taught? No, it's got to be taught and retaught. Even when they've been told, they still put themselves in those positions? Yes. Now, concerning the way that that gun operates, the Mossberg 500 series gun, you've already shown the jury that when you slide the pump back down after the trigger is pulled, a round will eject. Is there any way to determine the ejection pattern on such a weapon? It's kind of tough to do that with a shotgun. And why is that? Well, it depends on how the shooter holds the gun. It's okay to handle this, Your Honor. Court says yes. The witness says, for instance, if a shooter was to shoulder the shotgun and fire a round, and then when he operated the pump, there's nothing to stop you from operating the pump in this manner. There's also nothing to stop somebody from bringing it down here or some other position and holding the ejection port someplace where it's obviously going to throw the rounds. So, most guns that eject cartridge casings, like most semi automatic guns, you can tell where they're going to eject the shell casings. But with a shotgun, it's also one other thing. If I operate this slide handle, I can bring it back slowly and then just pick the expended shot shell out of it, out of my hand. Or if I do it with a medium power, and he showed us in that video, not this guy, but the Mossberg guy, showed us in that video how to pull it back and extract the shell. Or if I do it with medium power, let's say, it will kind of dribble out of the gun. If I really rack it hard, I can, maybe hit the back wall of the courtroom. It just depends on how the person that's using the shotgun is operating the pump. Ms. Abramson says, basically, that gun has an ejection port on the right side of the gun, correct? That's correct. So that is your first that, as you first demonstrated, if the person holds the gun at his shoulder and always keeps it stable and just ejects by sliding the pump without moving the gun, generally speaking, the shells will pop out to the right of the gun. That's correct. And if they're holding it right at their shoulder, probably to the right of the person as well. That's correct. But if you were to eject 5 rounds out of that gun, could you make them all drop directly straight down in a little line beneath you? If I wanted to, yes. Because you have the expertise to do that, correct? Yes. And I think if you move the slide slowly, then it doesn't eject very far. That's correct. If you move it a little faster, then it ejects a little farther, or a little farther away. That's correct. But generally speaking, if you just keep it in one position and pump the shells, whether they eject near or far, it would be off to the right of you. Yes. Is there some opinion or something that makes them eject, or does it work in another manner? There's a piece that's inside the receiver, this is the receiver right here. And there's a piece that's screwed to the side or held in with a rivet. I can specifically recall. But It's a little bar that's called an ejector. Extractors grab a hold of the shot shell and withdraw them from the chamber, and the ejector is over on the left side of the gun, here, and it sticks into the receiver. And so as the shotgun comes back, it hits the ejector, which tips it out of the ejection port. It's called an ejector. Okay. And that's how it works? Yes. Was that accurately described by Dr. McCarthy when he testified? No. Surprise, surprise. Have you ever heard in real life Deputy Van Horn of glycerin bullets? No. Have you heard of mercury bullets? In real life? Yes. No. Where are those sorts of things talked about, if anywhere, or written about? Novels, spy mysteries, stuff like that. Which means Dr. McCarthy just out of whole cloth made up some glycerin bullet BS on the stand, testified to it under oath. Uh, and he got that crap from spy novels. So there you go. If you needed any more reasons to think that Dr. McCarthy was not credible, there's one more. But in all of your expertise, you've never come across either a mercury bullet or a glycerin bullet, correct? That's correct. Based on your experience in examining the effects of shotgun firings at people, could you imagine a scenario where a shot column would come across someone's chest with enough force to actually compress the chest and yet make no holes in the clothing that person was wearing, no cuts to the skin, nothing? Objection, lack of foundation calls for speculation. Overruled. No. If a shot column came across a person's chest, a person who's wearing ordinary clothing, ordinary shirt, no body armor, if a shot column came across a person with enough force to press down the flesh of their chest, what would you expect to be left in by way of evidence of that? What would you expect to happen? Objection, lack of foundation, calls for speculation. Perhaps you could be a little more specific as to what you're asking, says the court. Okay. I think you've indicated that shotgun pellets emerge from the gun at something between 1200 and 1400. Objection leads and assumes facts not in evidence. Rephrase the question. I'd be rolling my eyes so hard at Mr. Khan right now, which would get me probably thrown in jail. That's why I can't be a lawyer. Ms. Abramson says, at what velocity do shotgun shots emerge from the barrel of the shotgun, assuming we're 12 gauge regular load number 4 buckshot? It depends on the manufacturer, between 12 and 1400 feet per second. So she was right. You said earlier it was 1200 to 400 or 1400. Okay. And if a column of shot has enough force, let's say, just to use layman's terms, to penetrate a limb of the human body, okay? If it's still going fast enough and whatever else is required to penetrate a limb of the human body, if before penetrating that limb, that column came across a person's chest so as to depress the chest inward by 2 inches, would you expect that shot column to cause damage or injury directly? Objection to any clothing that it came in contact with or to the actual surface of the human chest beneath the clothing. Objection assumes facts not in evidence and calls for speculation, lack of foundation. The court says, do you understand the question? The witness says, yes, I do. Objection is overruled. As far as it not being in evidence, it is in evidence. Somebody testified to that. Dr. McCarthy. Anyways. All right, so the witness says, yes, I would expect to see damage. I don't see how pellets would strike the chest and depress the chest without entering the chest. That's the way bullets work. By force, they penetrate skin or other objects. So you can't imagine how they could act like a hand and press without the individual pellets actually going inside the skin? That's correct. I can't. You would have at least had like graze wounds or something. It's impossible what the state is saying happened here. And would the same be true about how they could compress shirt fabric without tearing holes across the shirt? To get a mark on a shirt, you'd have to get such a close shot to the shirt that would go by there and leave lead wipe as the pellets go by. Leave lead wipe as the pellets go by. Not okay, wiping across the shirt, leaving lead across the shirt, I guess. But the lead wipe is, oh, that is a term. Lead wipe is a technical term for this. It's chemically detectable, and you could test for that and find if that's there. So if they're just brushing on the outer edge, if a shot column came across and the pellets just barely touch the shirt, you would expect a lead wipe. It's a possibility. If they touched that shirt hard enough to compress the chest 2 inches, you would expect more than lead wipe, wouldn't you? I'd expect lead wipes on the holes to the shirt. You would certainly expect holes to the shirt? Yes. If numerous pellets came across and individually pressed against a shirt, would you expect numerous holes? Yes. The court says, how much more do you have of this witness? Ms. Abramson says, I have one question. I maybe have one question. That's what I'm trying to check to see if I even have that, Your Honor. Yes, I know. To the best of your knowledge, Deputy Van Horn, was the clothing of the decedents in this case ever submitted to the sheriff's laboratory for testing apart from, let me strike that. Are you aware that a pair of white tennis shoes were submitted to the sheriff's laboratory for serology testing in this case? Yes. And that a Mr. Catalini from your laboratory was in charge of the examination? Yes. Apart from that, are you aware of any other clothing of the decedents being submitted to the sheriff's laboratory for examination or testing? I'm unaware of that. I have nothing further, Your Honor. The court says, all right, we'll be in recess until 1:30. Don't discuss this case with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 1:30. And they're going to take their lunch break, and we're going to stop here. And tomorrow we will continue with his testimony. I want to see where. Oh, I think he's going to be on the stand for a little bit longer. He's got cross, and I'm sure there's going to be some redirect and maybe even some recross on him. So, that was a good witness. I thought for the defense, he did a good job of kind of debunking Dr. McCarthy, even though we already knew that Dr. McCarthy was a really horrible witness. I think this really, excuse me, it's like a hiccup, weird thing. That was, I could get it to stop. Sorry. Yeah, so I think he did a really good job of discrediting Dr. McCarthy in this. I think that was mainly his role, and it appears that he hasn't kind of embraced the defense's theory at this point. Even though he hasn't said that, he hasn't explicitly said that, but he did say that, if you take these things for what they are, then the testimony of the experts from the first witness, where there was potentially movement of the decedents, and the testimony of the defendants, where they said that they were moving around. So, and the defendants said that the parents were moving around. So you have everyone moving and multiple variations of how this could have taken place. And this guy, who is a firearms expert, says you wouldn't reconstruct the scene. Another guy who says you wouldn't reconstruct it. And I really want to know who that deputy person or whoever was working for this guy, um, coming to him, asking him if they should do a reconstruction. And that got that question got sustained. We didn't get to hear that. So that would have been interesting because I think maybe that might have happened. So I'm going to leave you guys here. We will continue right where we left off, part 15. And thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you so much. Please hit the like button on your way out if you haven't done so already. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Or, no, sorry, this is airing Friday. So I see you Monday. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.